it seems that Canadians are showing themselves to be a loyal bunch when it comes to the Raptors, we the North. We see it at Jurassic Park and Jurassic Park West and Jurassic Park in Halifax and across the country, coast to coast to coast. We see it in that spontaneous singing of O Canada in Oakland Stadium. We saw it in the bagels that were served yesterday at the Kiddush lunch, red and purple. I didn't taste them. And it seems that Canadian Jewry is also a loyal bunch. I hope you have read about the most recent survey of Canadian Jewry. In the Times of Israel, there's a summative article there, and I'll highlight just a few of the learnings. An unprecedented comprehensive survey of Canadian Jewry published this week reveals a growing, connected, and cohesive community that may soon become the second largest Jewish community in the diaspora. And they have quantified how Jews in Canada tend to marry Jews, how Jews in Canada tend to have higher levels of Hebrew proficiency and Jewish literacy than our neighbors to the south. We travel to Israel twice as often as American Jews. 80% of us say we take regular trips to Israel. And the most validating news that has come from this most recent study says that there is remarkably little difference between the age cohorts among Canadian Jews. Most of us, including myself, had assumed that younger generations were less connected. But according to this survey, it's not so. Thank God, it is not so. When it comes to religious involvement, attending religious services, lighting Shabbat candles, in the degree of community participation, like belonging to Jewish organizations, donating to Jewish causes, having close Jewish friends, all of these findings are found more or less consistently across the generations. And then the other noteworthy truth that came from this study, as best we can know the truth, is that while Jewish identity among American Jewry is very strong in how one feels, among Canadian Jewry, it is equally strong in how one feels, but stronger in how we express those feelings. That our identity is not only something we keep internally, but it's something we act upon, something that we show through our deeds. And that is really what I would like to highlight today. On this Shavuot, when we commit ourselves to a life of Torah and mitzvot, how do we express our commitments, which we hold dear? Immediately following our services, let me give this announcement. Everyone is welcome, of course, to our congregational Kiddush lunch, which is in honor of our Pirchei Kodesh, our longtime loyal members of Holy Blossom Temple. Mazel tov to each of you celebrating a Chai mitzvah, a Chai milestone. And this Kiddush lunch is generously sponsored by Marcia and Kenny Cohen in memory of Bernard, Carol, and Samuel Braun. May their memories be for a blessing. We take the 613 mitzvot, and the prophet Micah reduced them to just 3 that you can hold close in your pocket. He encapsulated all of Torah into one verse, saying, "What does the Eternal require of you? Asot mishpat, to do justice, ahavat chesed, to love chesed," and we'll talk about what that means, and Hatznea lechet im Elohecha, to walk humbly with your God. Now that word chesed is usually translated softly, lightly, I would say, to mean something like kindness or loving kindness. However, Dr. Nelson Glick, a biblical archaeologist from the last century and president of Hebrew Union College, he did a comprehensive study of chesed in the Bible. The word chesed is found there in the Tanakh no less than 245 times. And Glick translates chesed to mean loyalty. Not kindness, but loyalty, which is a loaded word, a strong word that takes hold of us. He says the Hebrew Bible is a study in all the levels of loyalty that one must live by. What are our loyalties to our own family? What are the lines of loyalty that bind us to our kin, to our tribe, to our country, to the resident aliens among us and the refugees who come to be with us? And what are the lines of loyalty that we have also to the illegal migrants who have made their way into our borders? And what are the lines of loyalty to our neighboring countries and allies? And stretch out even further to the furthest concentric circle, there are even lines of loyalty to our enemies. All this is described in the Hebrew Bible. From the very beginning, there are stories of those relationships, the narratives that paint a picture of how loyalties can be affirmed and how they can be broken. And Shavuot, of course, puts chesed, loyalty, right at the heart of the day. This is the wedding day of God and the Jewish people. Our Torah is the ketubah we sign, and we pledge our devotion to be faithful and loyal one to the other. And God pledges to be loyal and steadfast when declaring the 13 innermost attributes of God. Just moments ago, when we stood before the open ark, we reminded God of those attributes, and primary among them, twice we hear, Rav Chesed, Notzer Chesed La'alafim. That God abounds with chesed, with loyalty, and God extends loyalty to the 1,000th generation. In a commentary on the book of Ruth, Rabbi Zeira teaches that this scroll, which we just heard an excerpt from, is not concerned with piety or defilement, not concerned with prohibitions or permissions. Why then was it written, he asks? To teach of the magnificent rewards that come to those who practice chesed. To show the magnificent rewards that come to those who live loyally. All the minor characters live according to the law as it is required of them, but the major characters, Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz, are singled out for their extraordinary acts of chesed. They go beyond the letter of the law. I believe when our sages, in their wisdom, assigned this book to the festival of Shavuot, they intended to provide us with a text powerful enough to balance out the weight of the law, to go beyond the law. On a day when we celebrate receiving Torah and mitzvot, we are reminded that the law in and of itself is not enough. The law alone will not fulfill the covenant that was struck at Sinai, nor will it bring us ultimately to the Messianic age, which is born of the line of Ruth. If there is any hope of these, for that kind of perfection, the world needs abounding chesed. The backdrop of the story is tragic and desperate. There is famine, early death, heartache, fear. Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah have nothing but their dignity. Their husbands are gone. They could easily cry out to high heavens, "This life is absurd." And yet these ordinary women, despite their suffering, can nevertheless perform ordinary and extraordinary acts of goodness which lead to hope. Orpah represents the typical response. She is good and respectful, and ultimately she chooses to turn back to her homeland. She represents the average person. She does what she has to do, and kindly. But Ruth clings to Naomi. The word is like dvekut, a clinging, a cleaving, a hanging on to for dear life. And that ultimate pledge of chesed she makes, do not urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Wherever you go, I will go. And where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. Our sages write a theological midrash on the book of Ruth. They notice that Boaz plays his part, and Ruth plays her part, and Naomi plays her part. And that moves God, looking on, to say, now I must do my part. This comes to teach that the chesed we do here on earth influences God and God's attribute of chesed that can be taken up in the high heavens. These thin lines of loyalty, which some we see, we know, we observe, and some are invisible to us. We don't even recognize them. But know this, our sages teach, these thin lines of human loyalty chain heaven and earth, and they are strong enough to establish the line that will one day redeem the world entire. It seems the word loyalty is out of fashion these days. Makes us even uneasy somehow. We think about tension between competing loyalties. But this day of Shavuot comes to say, Rav Chesed, abounding loyalty. We know that national loyalties can be dangerous. We know that family allegiances can be broken in so many ways. We see that millennials move from job to job, from city to city, sometimes without looking back. Loyalty, it seems, is a rare commodity, and we are poorer for it. We can find ourselves rudderless, historyless, lonely, because consciously or unconsciously, we can walk away all too easily from these ties that bind. Chesed is interdependence made sacred. Chesed is interdependence, loyalty, given and received, elevated to the sacred. And this is what we've seen celebrated in so many ways today. The Dalal family, with your unique loyalty to your unique Jewish heritage and the loyalty that we witness between the generations. The Melton students who came forward, your bonds to sacred study, and of course our Pirchei Kodesh, those of you who have shown year over year a lasting loyalty to this sacred congregation. The power of congregational life comes from precisely this kind of association. We look around the room and we see friends we know from the years, and we see people we've never laid eyes on before. And yet somehow we know that we are also bound up one to the other. In the language of the Talmudic sages, Zeh lazeh, Kol Yisrael arevim zeh lazeh. We are bound up, all of us, one to the other. And a competing text in the Talmud says, and Kol Yisrael arevim zeh bazeh. We are bound one to the other, mixed up with one another. not only to one another and for one another, but with one another. Marge Piercy writes in this final stanza of her poem entitled The Book of Ruth and Naomi, "At the season of first fruits, we recall those strangers, those travelers, those co-conspirators and scavengers who make do with leftovers and mill ends, whose friendship was stronger than fear, stronger than hunger, who walked together the road of shards, hands joined." On this day of celebration, when our people became a people at the foot of the mountain, we celebrate this unique kind of love, which is loyalty. And we recognize that this people, our people, literally make us who we are. It is fitting that Yizkor is observed on this day of Shavuot, because expressions of chesed, you see, can also be extended beyond the living. Many have come to this sanctuary at this hour to remember our own family whom we have loved and lost. We loyally call up their memories now. And with this Yizkor ceremony, we expand those circles, Rav Chesed, abounding loyalty, to the memories of those we did not know, but we make room for them in our hearts with our own. Loved ones who have no primary relative to say Kaddish for them. Fellow congregants, gone now. Community leaders, gone now. Favorite teachers, gone. Alas, the martyrs of our people throughout the centuries and from recent months as well, God help us, we pledge never to forget them. Our capacity to extend loyalty to the dead is only limited by our ability to remember. So let us now turn to remember. Page 340.